late one night. The emergency room was quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of monitors. The waiting room held a few exhausted figures, some seated upright and alert, others slumped in tired chairs, silently staring at the floor or their phones, lost in their own worries. The glass doors at the entrance swished open, and a woman hurried in, her steps uneven and her breathing shallow, betraying the discomfort that pressed against her chest. Her face was pale, a faint sheen of sweat reflecting the harsh lights above, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her small handbag, holding it close as if it were a shield. She had come seeking help, hoping for a simple act of care, an acknowledgement of her pain, and perhaps a solution to whatever illness or injury had forced her out of her home at such an hour. But the moment she approached the reception desk, she sensed an unexpected tension in the air, a coldness that made her stomach twist. The nurse on duty glanced at her over the rim of her glasses, her expression hard and impassive, as if the very presence of a patient was an intrusion. "You need to leave," the nurse said sharply, her voice devoid of empathy, carrying the weight of authority and finality. The words hit the woman like a physical blow, and for a heartbeat, she froze, staring at the nurse, disbelief mingling with rising fear. Her mind raced as she tried to explain herself, to plead that she needed care, that she was feeling unwell and could barely stand. Each word came out hesitant, quivering, but the nurse did not flinch, did not soften, and the rejection seemed absolute. Around her, other patients in the waiting room shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the woman and the nurse, sensing the tension but uncertain how to react. A low murmur rose, whispers of speculation and unease, but no one intervened, trapped by their own fear or exhaustion. The woman's heart pounded as adrenaline surged through her veins, every beat echoing in her ears louder than the distant monitors, louder than the faint hum of the lights. She felt isolated, small, and almost invisible in this sterile, brightly lit space, where her pain and fear collided with cold bureaucracy. Her mind spun, trying to find a way to convince the nurse, to get even a small measure of acknowledgement, any assurance that someone would listen. But each attempt was met with a curt shake of the head, a cold look, a dismissal that left her reeling. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she lingered there, caught between the desperate need for help and the harsh barrier of authority. The air in the emergency room felt thick, almost suffocating, and the usually sterile, orderly space had transformed into a battleground of emotion, where fear, frustration, and helplessness fought for dominance. The woman's chest tightened with every passing second, her hopes slipping slowly under the weight of rejection. And yet she did not give up entirely, for somewhere beneath the rising panic, a small spark of determination remained, refusing to let her leave without being heard. Around her, the silent witnesses, patients, waiting for their own turn, tired and anxious, watched this scene unfold with a mixture of unease and curiosity, sensing that something profound was occurring in the tension-filled room, a moment that would not easily be forgotten, where human vulnerability met unyielding authority, and the outcome remained uncertain. Minutes passed in the tense emergency room, each second stretching longer than the last, the woman's breathing coming in shallow, uneven gasps, as she leaned slightly against the edge of the reception desk, her hands trembling, her heart hammering in her chest with every futile attempt to plead for help. The sterile smell of disinfectant hung heavily in the air, mingling with the faint metallic scent of the nearby medical equipment, and the low hum of fluorescent lights above did nothing to ease the oppressive weight of the moment. Around her, the patients in the waiting room watched with uneasy eyes, some fidgeting nervously, others staring at the floor, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. She could feel their attention, and it both comforted and embarrassed her. A strange mix of shared humanity and vulnerability. Her thoughts raced, trying to find a solution, to find some way to break through the wall of indifference in front of her. But each word, Each attempt at explanation was cut short by the cold, dismissive tone of the nurse, who seemed to radiate an unshakable authority that the woman could not penetrate. Just as her hope began to waver, the glass doors of the emergency room swung open once again, and a new presence entered, a tall, composed figure moving with urgency but controlled purpose. It was her husband, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on his wife. And in that instant, he knew something was terribly wrong. There was no hesitation in his steps, only a quiet determination that drew the gaze of everyone nearby, a presence that demanded attention without a single raised voice. He moved swiftly toward her, each footstep measured and confident, his expression calm but resolute, the kind of calm that carries authority simply because it is so certain. He took in the sight of his wife, standing there helplessly, trying to maintain composure while her body betrayed the strain of her struggle. The shallow gasps of air, the slight tremble in her hands, and the panic that flickered in her eyes. Without a word yet, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment, giving her a small anchor amidst the storm of her fear and the cold dismissal that had come moments before. The nurse, who had until then seemed untouchable in her role, now faced a man whose presence alone shifted the energy of the room. The couple's shared glance carried a silent communication, a mix of fear, trust, and resolve, a bond that had been forged over years of life together, a bond that now brought a different kind of power into this sterile, fluorescent-lit space. The husband's voice broke the silence, calm but commanding, cutting through the low murmurs and whispers of the waiting patients, drawing every eye toward the confrontation without him even raising his tone. "Why are you refusing care?" he asked, his words precise, measured, and filled with a quiet intensity that brooked no argument. The nurse blinked, momentarily taken aback, as the man stepped slightly closer, his posture relaxed but authoritative, the kind of posture that signals both control and unwavering concern. He did not shout, he did not threaten, yet there was an undeniable power in the way he stood, the way his eyes met hers, expecting an honest response, expecting professionalism to outweigh prejudice, expecting basic human decency. The waiting room, once a background hum of uneasy faces, now became intensely attentive. Some patients leaned forward in their chairs, curiosity sparking behind tired eyes. Others whispered softly to companions, exchanging glances that expressed a mixture of surprise and quiet admiration at the sudden shift in atmosphere. The human dynamics of authority, fear, and empathy played out in real time as the husband's presence transformed what had been a tense, lonely moment for his wife into a confrontation charged with suspense and moral clarity. The woman beside him, now breathing slightly more steadily, watched him, hope flickering anew in her eyes as she realized that someone would finally ensure she was treated fairly. The nurse, faced with a calm but unwavering insistence, hesitated, her earlier confidence shaken. The man's gaze did not waver. It was steady, focused, and without malice, but it carried a weight of accountability that no one could ignore. Slowly, the tension between them built, a quiet, electric moment where every action and reaction held significance. The waiting room held its collective breath, sensing that something extraordinary was happening, a life lesson unfolding in real time as human compassion, concern, and integrity confronted indifference and dismissal. In that moment, the entire dynamic of the emergency room shifted. The woman's vulnerability was no longer a source of exploitation but a catalyst for intervention, a demonstration of how courage and care could pierce the veil of indifference. The husband's voice continued, firm yet controlled, pressing for clarity and demanding responsibility, ensuring that the nurse understood that her actions were being observed and that inaction or prejudice could not go unchallenged. Patients, staff, and even passers-by in the hall sensed the gravity of the situation. The moral weight, the profound reminder of human dignity and accountability. Slowly, as the seconds stretched into minutes. The nurse's cold exterior cracked just enough to reveal the responsibility she carried, the oath she had taken, and the moral imperative of her role in this high-stakes environment. The husband's insistence, his calm yet commanding demeanor, created a space for dialogue, for acknowledgement, and for the recognition that human life and care supersede any personal bias or indifference. All around, eyes followed every movement, every slight gesture, every inflection of tone. The situation, which had begun with fear and helplessness, now held suspense, moral tension, and the promise of resolution. For the first time that night, the woman felt the tide turn. The anchor beside her, the unwavering presence of her husband, provided a sense of safety and validation that she had feared lost. In that moment, the emergency room became more than just a sterile medical facility. It transformed into a stage where courage, empathy, and justice played out, a reminder that human presence, when coupled with calm authority and unwavering resolve, can change the course of events in profound and lasting ways. Each observer in the room, whether patient or staff, became a silent witness to a lesson in compassion, responsibility, and the undeniable power of standing up for another human being in their moment of need. And the reverberations of this encounter would linger long after that night ended, leaving a mark on everyone who had watched, a lesson that human care and moral courage could alter fear, helplessness, and inaction into respect, accountability, and the beginning of proper care. The husband stood beside his wife, his eyes steady, his breathing controlled. As he observed the tension in the emergency room, feeling the gravity of the situation pressing down on him, he knew that anger or loud words could escalate the situation, but he also understood that time was critical and that his wife needed immediate medical attention. With deliberate calmness, he took a step closer to the nurse, positioning himself in a way that was firm yet non-threatening. Projecting confidence and authority through his presence alone, he spoke clearly, his voice low but commanding, explaining the seriousness of his wife's condition, describing her symptoms with precision, emphasizing each detail without exaggeration, allowing the weight of his words to sink in naturally. As he spoke, the waiting room seemed to hold its breath. Other patients leaning slightly forward, drawn by the unusual stillness and intensity of the moment, sensing that something important was unfolding. Something beyond the ordinary flow of the ER. The nurse, initially rigid and unyielding, began to hesitate, her confidence shaken not by confrontation or insult, but by the calm conviction and unwavering concern evident in the husband's demeanor. He continued, choosing each word carefully, blending firmness with compassion, making it clear that this was not a matter of personal conflict, but of human care, a life that demanded attention without delay. Around him, the subtle sounds of the other beeping of monitors, the distant announcements over the PA system, the quiet shuffle of shoes on linoleum floor seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the resonance of his voice, deliberate, precise, and full of meaning. In that quiet intensity, the staff began to feel the weight of their responsibility. They realized that they were witnessing not a scene of confrontation, but a demonstration of patience, intelligence, and emotional strength. Each word the husband spoke carried authority without aggression, demanding action through clarity and reason rather than intimidation. He explained that his wife's condition required immediate evaluation, detailing the risk, the urgency, and the potential consequences of delay, never raising his voice, never gesturing wildly, yet commanding full attention through the seriousness and composure he displayed. As he spoke, small shifts occurred among the ER staff. Eyes met briefly. Subtle nods were exchanged, and hands paused over keyboards and clipboards, reflecting a growing recognition that the moment was significant and that the human element, the life of the patient, and the integrity of care was paramount. The husband's calmness created a ripple effect. Tension that had been thick with frustration and hesitation began to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding that action was necessary. The patient, his wife, felt the shift as well, her fear and anxiety slowly giving way to relief, comforted by the knowledge that someone she trusted was advocating for her with such quiet power, his presence alone serving as both shield and guide. Even the nurse who had initially refused care could no longer ignore the clarity and moral weight of his words. She found herself listening, reevaluating her own stance, realizing that this was no ordinary plea but a measured, precise articulation of urgent human need. The calm confrontation unfolded like a carefully orchestrated balance of tension and release, suspense hanging in the air as the room collectively absorbed the significance of the husband's approach. There was no shouting, no accusations, no loss of composure, only a steady, unwavering insistence that the patient's life and well-being came first, and that neglect or delay was unacceptable. The husband's poise highlighted a powerful truth. Authority is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is quiet, confident, and infused with love and respect, demanding attention through reason and human connection. Patients and staff alike felt the tension and the shift, sensing that the outcome of this encounter would not be determined by volume or aggression, but by patience, clarity, and emotional intelligence. With each carefully spoken sentence, the husband guided the situation toward resolution, gradually dismantling resistance with reason and compassion, making it impossible for anyone to remain indifferent. His words bridged the gap between conflict and cooperation, fear and trust, hesitation and action, leaving a clear path for the ER staff to follow without the need for confrontation. The suspense in the room was almost tangible. Every person present understood that the next few minutes could determine whether this situation would escalate or be resolved through calm, deliberate intervention. Slowly, the staff began to respond, moving with purpose, checking equipment, opening doors, and preparing for immediate care, all while the husband maintained his composed presence, ensuring that his wife's safety remained the priority. The atmosphere, once tense and uncertain, now carried a sense of controlled urgency, a focus sharpened by his careful management of the moment. In those intense minutes, the husband's calm confrontation achieved what force or anger could never have accomplished. He commanded respect, drew attention to the critical need for care, and created an environment in which life, not pride or stubbornness, was paramount. Patients, staff, and even the initial skeptic nurse watched as reason and love prevailed, as authority expressed through empathy and clarity triumphed over hesitation, and as a simple act of composed advocacy began to reshape the energy of the entire room. In that charged silence, filled with anticipation, everyone present understood that they were witnessing a powerful demonstration of human dignity, resilience, and the impact of calm, compassionate action, a moment that would linger in memory long after the immediate danger had passed, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of all who saw how clarity, poise, and unwavering concern could confront resistance, protect life, and inspire respect without the need for aggression, confrontation, or chaos. The hospital room, already charged with tension, seemed to hold its breath as the husband continued to stand calmly beside his wife, projecting a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty of the emergency room staff and the anxious murmurs of other patients. Every movement, every word, was deliberate, measured, and infused with the purpose of protecting his wife, while ensuring that responsibility was acknowledged by those entrusted with care. He did not raise his voice, did not gesture wildly, and did not resort to threats or accusations. Instead, he spoke with clarity and precision, outlining the urgency of the situation, emphasizing the ethical duty that every medical professional carried to care for those in need, regardless of background, circumstance, or personal biases. His calm composure created a stark contrast to the unease in the room, drawing attention naturally, commanding respect not through force, but through moral authority. Patients who had been quietly waiting glanced up from their chairs, noticing how a single human could stand resolute in the face of resistance, demanding accountability with dignity and restraint. Even the nurse who had initially refused care now felt the weight of the husband's words pressing upon her conscience, as he spoke with a tone that combined firmness with respect, making it impossible to dismiss the situation as a simple misunderstanding. He reminded the entire staff that their role was not just to perform procedures or follow schedules, but to uphold the trust placed in them by those who entered the hospital seeking help, to recognize the vulnerability of patients, and to act without prejudice, hesitation, or delay. Each sentence he spoke seemed to resonate through the room, reverberating quietly but powerfully. As staff members began to adjust their posture, straighten their uniforms, and take notice of the human dignity and integrity on display, the patients, some of whom had witnessed moments of frustration or neglect in other facilities, felt a mixture of awe and reassurance, realizing that in that small, tense space, courage and moral clarity could create a profound impact without a single raised hand or harsh word. Slowly, the tension that had gripped the room began to transform, as the energy shifted from uncertainty and discomfort to admiration and quiet respect. Colleagues who had initially exchanged unsure glances now nodded subtly, acknowledging that the husband's conduct exemplified the very principles that their profession claimed to uphold, but that were sometimes forgotten under stress or routine. The atmosphere seemed to hum with a collective recognition of integrity, as if the husband's calm insistence had not only protected his wife, but also reminded everyone present why they had chosen the path of care and responsibility. There was a sense of suspense in the air, a shared understanding that what had begun as a conflict could be resolved, not with confrontation but with poise, clarity, and unwavering commitment to what was right. In that charged silence, the husband's actions became a model for those watching, demonstrating that authority and influence are often most powerful when exercised with patience, moral conviction, and respect for others, rather than through fear, anger, or intimidation. The nurse, previously unyielding, began to reassess her position, her face reflecting a mix of surprise, acknowledgement, and subtle remorse, as she realized that the situation was not about control or ego, but about human life and professional integrity. Other staff members, from attending physicians to medical assistants and even security personnel, felt the gravity of the moment settling over them, recognizing that their reactions, their attentiveness, and their adherence to duty were being quietly but firmly called into account. Meanwhile, the patients in the waiting area, previously passive observers, now felt a sense of reassurance that someone was advocating for fairness and care, witnessing in real time that courage coupled with respect could influence behavior and ensure that ethical standards were honored. Every gesture the husband made, slight shifts in stance, careful eye contact with staff, gentle reassurance of his wife, reinforced the message that strength lies not in volume or aggression, but in calm clarity, integrity, and the unwavering commitment to doing what is right. The suspense, which had initially filled the room with tension, began to dissolve into a collective recognition of human decency, leaving a lingering impression that what had occurred was more than a confrontation, it was a lesson, silently imparted, about accountability, empathy, and courage under pressure. The husband's presence became the catalyst for a shift in energy that no one could ignore. His actions demonstrated that advocacy for a loved one and adherence to principles could coexist, creating an environment in which respect, responsibility, and moral clarity took precedence over confusion, hesitation, or bias. By the time the medical team finally moved decisively to attend to his wife, guided by the husband's calm insistence, the entire room had transformed. The narrative of resistance and refusal had been replaced by one of understanding, acknowledgement, and renewed commitment to the values that underpin care. Witnessing this, everyone present, patients, nurses, doctors, and ancillary staff, felt the quiet power of integrity in action, realizing that courage need not be loud or confrontational to be effective. Sometimes, it is the steady, composed voice of reason, anchored in love and respect, that moves hearts, commands attention, and ensures that ethical responsibility is honored. In that moment, the ER was no longer just a room of medical procedures and rushed decisions. It had become a space where human values, moral clarity, and quiet leadership intersected, leaving a lasting impression on every witness, proving that integrity exercised with patience and dignity could alter behavior, inspire respect, and resolve conflict without a single shout, argument, or act of aggression. The nurse stood frozen for a moment, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, as the weight of the husband's presence pressed upon her conscience with a quiet yet undeniable force. And in that instant, the world around her seemed to shrink until it was only the urgency of her patient, the steady, calm authority of the husband, and the realization of her own actions. She had been so sure, so certain in the heat of her frustration or in the comfort of routine assumptions, that she had the right to dismiss a patient, to judge and decide without fully considering the human life before her. And now, confronted with a man whose composure radiated both love and moral clarity, she could no longer ignore the stark truth. Her behavior had been wrong, potentially harmful, and completely preventable had she allowed empathy and understanding to guide her instead of impatience or bias. And as she looked into his eyes, she saw not anger, not threat, but a quiet demand for recognition of responsibility, a mirror held up to her actions that reflected more than just her professional duty. It reflected her humanity, her choices, and the consequences of them. And the longer she lingered in that gaze, the more she felt an unsettling mix of regret and awareness that the decisions she made in moments of stress could ripple outward, affecting not only the immediate patient but everyone in the room, including her colleagues, the waiting patients, and the broader culture of care within the hospital. And as the tension in the room shifted from confrontation to contemplation, she noticed subtle changes among the staff, subtle nods, shifting eyes, the quiet intake of breath as others realized the fragility of human judgment under pressure, the delicate balance between professionalism and personal emotion. And she began to think, truly think, about the countless times assumptions, fatigue, or unseen biases had influenced decisions, some minor, some potentially large, and how quickly and silently harm could occur when empathy was absent, when respect was forgotten, and when patience was overlooked. And in that reflection, she also began to see the power of a calm, composed presence, of moral courage exercised without aggression, of advocacy performed with love rather than force, and how these qualities could transform not only a moment of potential crisis into a learning opportunity, but also influence the hearts and minds of everyone witnessing it, including herself. And she remembered her training, the core principles of care and responsibility, and how as silly they could be overshadowed by human error. And she realized that true professionalism required not just technical skill, but also emotional intelligence, awareness, and humility. A continuous commitment to see beyond frustration, beyond personal feelings, to the essential needs of the patient before her. And in the silence that followed the husband's firm yet compassionate words, she felt the first stirrings of accountability. The recognition that her role was not merely to perform tasks or enforce rules, but to safeguard life with empathy, to act as a conduit for compassion and understanding. And she understood that this moment, difficult and humbling as it was, could serve as a turning point, not just for her, but for the culture of care in the ER, for the way staff approached patients, and for the lessons passed quietly among colleagues about vigilance, responsibility, and the human impact of every decision. And as the seconds stretched into minutes, she took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and resolve, knowing that acknowledgement of error was the first step toward improvement, and that the presence of someone who could calmly, firmly, and respectfully demand accountability had opened her eyes to the importance of reflection, the necessity of patience, and the power of empathy. And in that understanding, the tension in the room transformed into a quiet sense of purpose. As the nurse straightened, adjusted her posture, and prepared to act in alignment with both her professional duty and her renewed awareness of the moral weight she carried, understanding that the night's events would remain with her, a lasting reminder of the consequences of judgment without compassion, and the profound influence one person's calm integrity could have on the lives of many, leaving her both humbled and motivated to embody that same balance of care, clarity, and human decency in every patient encounter that followed. As the tense moments in the emergency room unfolded, the hospital administration, having been alerted to the situation by both concerned patients and attentive staff members, acted swiftly and decisively, moving through the corridors with a sense of urgency that reflected the seriousness of the incident. And their arrival brought with it a mix of authority, calm professionalism, and deliberate efficiency that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. The human presence of the husband, still standing firmly by his wife, had already established a moral gravity, but the administrator's intervention added structure and action to the concern, ensuring that every step taken now was guided by responsibility and the hospital's core duty to protect and care for those in need. And the patient, the woman who had only moments before been turned away, felt a cautious relief as the medical team approached her, their faces showing a mixture of attentiveness, empathy, and readiness. And she could sense that the focus was finally on her needs, on the urgency of her discomfort, and on providing care without delay, while the nurse, who had earlier refused assistance, stood slightly apart, her shoulders tense, her mind racing with reflection, aware now more than ever of the weight of her earlier decisions. And when the administration quietly but firmly instructed that immediate attention be provided, the nurse stepped back, allowing the trained medical personnel to attend to the patient, her own actions now tempered by the recognition of error and a desire to restore both professional integrity and personal accountability. And as the patient was carefully examined, monitored, and treated, every movement by the staff seemed deliberate yet gentle, showing the precision of skill combined with compassion. And the husband, maintaining his calm but observant stance, watched the process intently, offering support to his wife while ensuring that the medical team adhered to proper protocols. And in the midst of this controlled activity, the other staff members, who had previously witnessed the confrontation, began to absorb the lesson being demonstrated, that swift, organized, and empathetic action could rectify a situation before it escalated, and that leadership combined with moral clarity had the power to correct mistakes and inspire accountability without chaos. And as the moments stretched on, the nurse herself participated in the process under supervision, administering care where appropriate, learning firsthand from the experience, while the administration took notes, spoke quietly among themselves about policy changes, and considered new training measures to prevent similar occurrences, ensuring that patient rights and dignity would always remain at the forefront of practice. And the atmosphere, once thick with tension, gradually shifted toward relief and reflection as the patient received proper medical attention. The staff witnessed both correction and instruction, and the nurse acknowledged the mistakes she had made with a quiet but sincere humility, understanding that recognition of error, immediate correction, and a commitment to do better were the foundations of both personal and professional growth. And by the end of this intense episode, the emergency room had transformed into a space, not only of healing for the patient, but also of learning for all those present, demonstrating that human compassion, combined with structured action and ethical responsibility, could turn a potentially disastrous moment into an enduring example of care, accountability, and the profound impact of addressing mistakes with speed, empathy, and deliberate integrity. As the immediate crisis in the emergency room subsided and the woman finally received the care she urgently needed, the ripple effects of that night extended far beyond her physical health, reaching into the hearts and minds of everyone present, leaving impressions that could not easily be erased. The husband, standing calmly by her side, had not only ensured that she was treated with the attention and urgency her condition required, but had also, through his composed yet firm insistence, restored a profound sense of justice to a situation that had begun with fear, uncertainty, and disregard. And as the medical team worked efficiently, monitoring her vitals, administering treatment, and providing explanations about her condition, the woman felt a growing sense of relief, not simply because her immediate physical needs were being addressed, but because she realized that dignity and respect had been defended, that her voice, however small, in the crowded and fast-moving hospital environment, had been heard, and that her humanity mattered. And this awareness settled over her like a comforting presence, giving her a renewed sense of trust in those who were trained to care for her. And she looked at her husband with gratitude, noticing how his calm authority, combined with a deep personal investment in her well-being, had transformed what could have been a moment of humiliation into a moment of protection and advocacy. While around them, the hospital staff, both those directly involved in the incident and those who had observed from nearby, began to quietly reflect on what had just unfolded, recognizing that courage was not always loud or aggressive, but could manifest in composed, principled action, and that one individual's determination to do what was right could shift the energy of an entire room, alter the behavior of colleagues, and reinforce the ethical obligations that underpinned their roles. And nurses and other medical professionals exchanged glances, whispered observations, and thoughtful comments about the importance of empathy, active listening, and maintaining professional responsibility regardless of personal biases, noticing how quickly assumptions or fatigue could lead to error or harm, and how accountability could be restored through clear, calm intervention. And as the woman began to feel stronger physically, the emotional weight of the night's events began to lift, replaced by a profound awareness of the impact that human action, integrity, and compassion could have in even the most charged situations. And she realized that the care she had received went beyond medications, procedures, or monitoring. It was also a healing of spirit, a restoration of dignity, and a reaffirmation of the principle that every person deserves to be treated with respect. And as the staff continued their work, some quietly discussing new protocols, others reflecting on their own approach to patient care, the husband remained a steady presence, ensuring that the lessons of the night were not lost amidst the routine of hospital operations, demonstrating through behavior that advocacy and moral courage could be as crucial as any medical intervention. And the atmosphere of the emergency room, once tense and divided, slowly shifted into one of awareness, reflection, and cautious optimism, as those who had witnessed the incident recognized the importance of their own choices in moments of ethical challenge, understanding that a single act of courage, when guided by integrity and empathy, could inspire change not just for one patient, but for the broader environment, influencing colleagues, shaping policy, and reinforcing the foundational values of care, respect, and humanity in a space that often balanced life and death decisions with the routine demands of medical procedures. And as the night continued, the story of what had happened, though still unfolding, quietly began to circulate among staff, serving as a silent lesson in accountability, courage, and the profound impact that one human being's intervention could have on the lives of others. And by the time the woman was stable, her condition carefully monitored and supported, the emotional healing, the restoration of trust, and the reaffirmation of dignity had been achieved in parallel with her physical treatment, leaving an indelible mark on her, her husband, and everyone who had witnessed the night's events, and ensuring that the narrative of courage, integrity, and the power of composed action would be remembered long after the immediate crisis had passed, shaping future interactions and inspiring a renewed commitment to empathy and human-centered care in the hospital. The events of that night quickly became more than just an isolated incident within the walls of the emergency room. They spread across the hospital like a quiet but powerful wave, reaching not only staff and patients, but also the broader community. And the story carried with it a lesson that transcended the details of the confrontation itself, touching on themes of courage, compassion, and the profound impact one person can have when acting with integrity and love. The husband, who had arrived with calm determination and unwavering focus on the well-being of his wife, became the central figure in a narrative that emphasized the importance of standing up for what is right, demonstrating that true strength does not always come from aggression, authority, or loud demands, but from clarity, poise, and a steadfast commitment to protect those who are vulnerable. And as the story circulated, people reflected on how easily fear, bias, or complacency could allow harm to occur in even highly trained environments, and how a single individual's willingness to act with courage and empathy could interrupt a pattern of neglect or injustice, creating an immediate effect and leaving a lasting impression. And in hospital corridors, nurses and doctors discussed the night's events with quiet intensity, recalling how the husband had approached the situation without anger, without threats, but with a firm, composed insistence that prioritized his wife's safety, dignity, and right to care. And they marveled at how his actions had transformed a tense, potentially harmful situation into a moment of moral clarity, forcing reflection and self-examination among staff who witnessed it, some thinking of times they might have been passive when intervention was needed, and recognizing that courage could take many forms, that a calm voice could cut through chaos more effectively than shouting, and that demonstrating care, protection, and accountability could command respect far more than aggression or confrontation. And beyond the hospital, community members who heard the story began sharing it with others, reflecting on how love motivated action, how the desire to protect and uplift another person could drive change, and how the simplest acts, when guided by purpose and compassion, could create ripples that influenced not only those directly involved, but also those observing, teaching lessons about empathy, responsibility, and the enduring impact of human connection. And as the narrative traveled through conversations, social media, and word of mouth, it emphasized that the night had been a defining moment, not because of conflict alone, but because it illustrated the profound difference that one determined individual could make in a situation where injustice or neglect threatened another, showing that courage rooted in love and clarity could transform fear into safety, inaction into intervention, and uncertainty into understanding. And over time, the incident became a symbol, a quiet legend within the hospital and beyond, reminding everyone that true strength is measured not by force, wealth, or authority, but by the willingness to stand for what is right, to protect the vulnerable, to uplift rather than dominate, and to act with a moral certainty that inspires others to do the same, leaving an enduring mark on the hearts of those who witnessed it, the lives of those directly affected, and the culture of care in the hospital, proving that a single act of care, courage, and human empathy could resonate far beyond its immediate moment, creating a story remembered for its lesson, its inspiration, and the timeless reminder that love and principled action can indeed change the world, even if only one person at a time.